Welcome to another episode of Paint Society. My name is Brian, and in this quick startup guide, we're going to show you some basic bodywork, primering, and painting. We can see the damage to this Lexus ES350 is limited to the lower quarter panel, and well, PDR was not an option because there is some scratches to the quarter panel. The first thing you're going to want to do for any project is remove as much as possible. That way we don't have to tape anything off, and we can get full paint around the edges, so later on we're not going to have any peeling or flaking. For this particular job, we removed the sail panel, we dropped the bumper, and we removed the tail light, and that was going to give us full access to all of the panel that we needed to. Now you can see the dent here is raised, so we're going to be using a small PDR hammer and a slapping stick, and we'll start off here with the mini hammer. And the reason why I like this is because it's the least aggressive approach. It's got a rubber tip on it, and we're looking just to knock down the high of the crease. We're not going to need to do too much work here, and this will not damage the panel beyond too much of what you wanted to do. We'll then take the slapping stick because it really disperses the energy using the hammer and helps flatten it out even more without putting any sort of divots or dents into the panel. Sometimes when doing body work, you can actually add damage. That's why it's so important to take the least aggressive approach, especially if you are new to bodywork. You don't want to make it any worse than what it is. Now here, what we're doing is we need to sand down to 180 grit. Now we could have used 80, but that would have been a little bit too coarse. And if you take a little bit extra time, 180 will do just fine. And here we're using a 320 to do a back sand. That means that any sort of body filler, if it lands beyond the metal, well, it has a scratch that it can fall into, but you want to try to contain your body filler to within the metal, okay? So that's exactly why we sanded it completely down. Now this is a glazing filler. A glaze is almost like icing. It's very, very thin, and it levels off very well. Since the damage really wasn't bad at all here, this is why we're using such a thin filler. So what you can do is you can wipe it on and then give it one final wipe to make sure it's all nice and even. And after it's dried 15 minutes later, we're using 180 grit here, and we're not using any air tools to do our sanding. Well, if we were to use sort of any DAs at this point, we would just not have even body work. And for something this small, get your blocks out, do it the old-fashioned way. It's going to turn out that much better. Now, once it's all sanded, then you can use your DA at this point. Again, with that 320, just go over it lightly, kind of refine it, make sure that it's going to get ready for its primer, and any overspray that lands outside of the body filler will have something to land on. Now, this is a 600 grit right here. Not totally necessary that you do this at the point of primering, but it does help, and I'm only doing it in a small area. Once again, so if any overspray lands, it lands on sanded clear coat and not unsanded clear coat. Just a good practice to always do on any panel before blending. Now we're using a self-etching primer just so our bare metal is protected. It's just a light coat, and you really don't need to put it on too heavy, and it just needs to go over the body filler. Now, once that dries 15 or 20 minutes later, we're going to be using a black primer here because it's very easy to hide, and you'll see that once we hit the paint booth, that we won't need many coats to hide this. So I did about 2 or 3 coats here with about 10 minutes in between. I'm just showing you one here, and we gave it a good 2 hours to dry, and then we did a soft mask around the whole quarter panel all the way up to the A-pillar, because we're going to be sanding, and we don't want to sand any panels that don't need sanding, like the bumper or the door. So we can see here we're ready to go, and I'm going to be using a 400 grit on a block. So we sanded our body filler with 180. Now we're sanding our primer with 400, and this is a much finer grit. The higher the grit, well, the higher the number, the finer the preparation for paint. You can see how we start low and we really work our way up. So this is a P400 grit, and we're just sanding the area, and then we're going to go over it with our 6 and 800 grit. Okay, so mainly 600 around the primered areas and everything else is 800. Being very careful of those edges. You'll see here in a moment what we do for those edges. So I just knocked down everything with my 800 and now I'm using a gray scuff pad. Now, since this is a metallic color, you don't want to go too aggressive with it. So the gray pad is equal to around 800 grit. And we're just going over all of our edges, and this will also help knock down any of the areas that are glossy, that will be in the low spots of the orange peel. Even in these areas, it's very easy to get a scuff pad and really scuff it up. If you don't scuff it up, guys, it's going to peel. That's why it's so important to remove the edge of that bumper, to remove the taillight, because if not, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. It will definitely peel down the road if you do not move these crucial parts that are part of the panel itself. You can see we removed the front molding, and we have a natural breaking point on the roof of this Lexus, and you want to take your tape to the nearest breaking point. Okay, at this point we're going to wash it down. I always prefer to wash. We're using a degreaser. Once again, it just helps remove all of the dust from the sand scratches and really helps for a cleaner and better job. Once it's all dry, we're bringing it into the paint booth and we're ready to give you a small lesson on masking. Now remember that masking is always different for different parts of the vehicle, but I'm going to show you how to mask it up on this quarter panel. Now on the edge of the glass, it had a rubber seal, so we're using some of this trim tape, which is really good, and it's going to help pull that molding away from the quarter panel. If we were to just tape it up, what could end up happening is it will bridge onto the molding, and then, well, we're not getting paint underneath the quarter panel where it meets the trim, and that will eventually peel as well. So pull that molding away from the quarter panel, and then we can spray our paint properly. Now in the trunk, what I'm going to be doing is wiping it down with the degreaser first. You can see that dirt. If you ever wonder why your tape's not sticking, it's because you're not cleaning where it's going to stick first. Simple task that most people skip, and they wonder why they run into issues. Let's just take a step back and clean so we don't have any of those issues first. Now I always like to use 6-inch paper on all my jams, and this just really helps keep dirt down and protect it from overspray. Most of the time I'll double up on both of the panels so that when they meet, there's no way for overspray to get through. You can see here we're using our soft edge foam tape, and this really helps to get a nice soft edge between the two panels. Now anything that you see in this video, I will add it to the description so you guys can get your project moving with the right products. At this point, we're ready to start bordering out up to where we've sanded our clear coat, and this border will help us later on. Once we cover the car, we'll go ahead and we'll cut on this yellow tape to put down our plastic. Now moving along, this is the most important part, getting everything masked up nice and tight. Here's our natural breaking point on the roof, and then we're going to back mask up our quarter panel above the glass. You can see we're back masking here, and what that pretty much means is just reversing the tape so that we can have a soft edge. So instead of doing the foam tape, which can sometimes be a pain, here we're using our 2-inch tape and we're putting it on upside down, and what this will do in effect is create a soft edge. You can see how it's upside down here, and we'll show you how that works here in just a moment. Now in the door jamb, we're using our 6-inch paper, and that 6-inch paper once again is going to help keep overspray off of the door jamb out of the car as well. Now at this point, once we put that paper down, we'll line it up again with our foam tape, and never stretch the foam tape. If you pull it too hard, it will lift and it really becomes a big pain. So really go easy and gentle on it. It's very delicate. Now once that's all done, you can see that we're going inside the door, and we're going to put a little bit of masking tape here. Now we could have also done our 6-inch, but sometimes with the foam tape and double 6-inch masking, it can be a problem with the foam. It just pulls it down and it doesn't leave a nice clean edge. Once you close the door, we're going to use a 1.5 or 1.25 tape you can use here, and just tape along that edge right onto the foam tape if you need to kind of help secure it. And then we'll close our doors and make sure that our doors are closed underneath that back-sided tape, okay? You can see here that back mask tape. We're going to go ahead and lightly pull it down, and that will create the soft curve, that soft edge right underneath the A, B, and C pillar that we want. And in effect, what it does is it completely seals off the glass and the quarter panel so we don't get any overspray into the vehicle. To this day, that's the best way that I can do it. Now, once you have everything all bordered out, then you'll pull your plastic. And the way I do it is I pull the corners first and I make a knot, and I pull the other corner and then I tie it in the middle. And this really just helps keep everything nice and tight. If you do have a real downdraft booth, you're not going to have to worry about this, but most of us guys at home, we don't. So then at this point, we'll just take our razor blade and we'll cut along the yellow line or the yellow tape. And once that's all cut out, and then we'll take our tape and we'll go back over the surface. Now I'm using 1.25 inches and a 2-inch tape in certain areas just to make sure that our plastic is completely taped down. You don't want any plastic flapping. A lot of guys don't understand that the tape job is just as important as the paint job. You can't get a clean paint job unless you get a clean tape job. Now what we're using here is 2 different cleaners, a water-based and a solvent-based cleaner, which again, I'll link in the description so that you can use. You won't see me use a tack cloth that often, but when I do, it is before base coat and usually before clear coat. I try to limit as much contact as I can with the panel. It just really helps for static and honestly keeping dirt off of the panel. So I'll give it one good tacking, and you won't see this until we go to clear coat. Now this is a blending additive, and I'll go ahead and link this in the description. This is basically a clear base coat, and this is a visual aid more than anything for me. It's going to help me see how well my blend is, and also it fills in minor sand scratches. I'm not using any sealer here because we have a very tight blend and we need to make sure that we're not pushing our sealer too far. So our first coat of base right here with our DV1 around 14 psi is just covering up the black, and in one coat with this system, it is completely covered. And we want to limit the amount of coats we put on, and once it's flashed off, we're going to put one more on. But check this out, we're going to take that blending additive and our base coat, and we're going to mix the two 1-to-1 right in the paint booth. Since we have perfect coverage already, we're going to use this to make sure that everything is completely blended out. By adding too much paint, sometimes we can get that paint too close to the back door and it will not match because no two colors are the same. So we got it at around 12 psi on a DV1 and we're lightly fanning it on, and that's going to wrap it up for this blend. You can see the color match and the blend is perfect, and we're very, very happy with the way it is looking. At this point, we're ready for our clear coat, and we're using the DV1 clear coat gun, and I run this gun around 18 to 21 psi. Now the first coat I don't put on too wet, but this one came out fairly nice. If you have any dry spots or anything like that on the first coat, don't worry, you can always get them on the second coat. I try to follow around 75% overlap, but more than likely you can go a little bit more if that's not working out for you. What I really like to do is just watch the paint. If it's dry, I just slow down and I put it on a little bit wetter. There's no reason for you to follow exactly what I say. If you have a different circumstance that is going in your favor, roll with it and work with it. Now, 2 coats of clear coat is all you're really going to need for this type of high solids clear coat. You don't want to get into 3 unless you really need to, but I like to allow a good 10 minutes flash time in between coats. We're pushing around 80 degrees in the paint booth, so that's enough time for the paint to really kick and accept the second coat. After the first coat, it actually looks really beautiful, but you need to put a second coat on to build the mills. And that's exactly what we did here. If you have any dirt that's in the finish, sometimes that second coat really helps to flow over and bury it just a little bit, which also helps out with your finish. Once it's all done, we have a beautiful OEM texture, a beautiful Lexus finish that was only possible because of the clean prep, the clean tape, and the different techniques used in this particular video. Now we allowed this to dry for a good 2 hours. We did a little light bake cycle, but if you're at home, give it a full 3 to 4 hours before you start to unmask. We got our bumper put on, and I'm really happy the way that the quarter matched the back door, and this job is ready for assembly, and it's ready to get back to the customer. I hope you guys enjoyed this particular video and this quick startup guide that can really help you in the future for your project. And I would love to hear in the comments what you're working on and how this video has helped you guys out. This is Brian from Paint Society reminding you to not overthink it. It's just paint, and I'll see you guys on the next episode.